Alright, everyone. It's June, which means another month passed by, and that's time for another VGR podcast. Once a month, we take a look at certain topics related to the world of video games. So, last month, we took a look at online gaming services. The month before, we took a look at home consoles, and the very first episode was handhelds. So, there's a specific theme in mind in the world of video games, and we take everything related to that topic and rank them from the very worst to the absolute best. And I really love this system because, and I said this last time around, but I can't emphasize this enough. This is so much better than doing top 10s or top 15s or top 50s, whatever you want to say, because it makes more sense. And it's more efficient. It just makes more sense than making a top 10 list, because when you do a top 10, it's kind of obscure. Meaning, when you rank something, right? When you create a top 10, that means that number 9 is better than number 10, number 8 is better than 9, so on and so forth. But there's really no reason why, when a lot of people make these lists, they make the list just to make the list, if that makes sense. There can be a situation where two things can be just as good as each other, but you're kind of forced to say, well, this is number 1 and this is number 2. I like it where I could just say the level of quality and the innovation and just like how great these things were for their time period. I could just say these things were all dog shit, absolutely terrible. Like there's no saving grace about it. It's just awful. But I could also say, these handful of things really innovated and really contributed to the video game industry and were amazing. And that's why I like this system so much, and I haven't moved on from it yet, while everyone else has kind of moved on from the meme at this point, because this was a huge meme for a while. I mean, everyone was doing this thing. But I actually enjoy this ranking system very much, and I think you guys do too. So here we go with another episode. This is episode 4 of the VGR podcast, Video Game Rankings. And like I said, last month we took a look at online gaming services or gaming networks, to where the specific purpose was to play your games online with friends or just with other people around the world via the internet. And that was pretty much the main focus last time around. And this time we're going to be taking a look at redesigned consoles. So it seems like console redesigns have really become a mainstay in the video game industry. Like it's pretty much a given that any given console is going to get redesigned, so long as it's relevant and successful to begin with. Like if it was just a total failure in the first place, it's just going to fade to obscurity, like the Wii U. Like the Wii U never got a redesign because Nintendo figured, why bother, right? So these are usually successful consoles. I mean, sometimes you have a situation where the console manufacturer realized they messed up big time the first time around and had to really fix it. Had to really change the overall way that they presented their console. And there are really two main reasons why manufacturers decide to redesign their consoles. I mean, first and foremost, the main reason that I see is to cut costs. That seems to be the most important rationale for a manufacturer to redesign their hardware, because it's not a new console generation. You're pretty much more or less working with the same hardware. You just take away a few bells and whistles optimally, right? Not important things, but other times manufacturers really decide to cheap out and take out a lot of key features to cut on costs, right? Because you're not going to add features and cut costs. That doesn't make any sense. But you will add features, and this goes into our second reasoning why manufacturers decide to redesign their hardware, is to maintain or reinvigorate interest in that platform. So let's say a console is doing particularly well for the first few years of its life cycle, but it starts to slow down because let's say there's a new console out there that's really hot right now, or people are just losing interest in your platform for whatever reason. Manufacturers decide to reinvent itself, almost to reinvent the platform by not moving on to a new generation because that's way more costly, but to redesign the feel, the look, and the overall presentation of that specific platform. And in these cases, usually, features are added to that console that were not available on the previous iteration. So, without further ado, let's get into the F rank. Because, oh man, there are plenty of terrible redesigns that completely failed at everything I just said. So, let's take a look at the very worst console redesigns. So, we got 5 consoles here, and some of these may look familiar to you. It's definitely the one all the way on the right because it's the most recent redesign that we've ever seen, but we'll get to that. Let's start from the left all the way to the right. So this thing, it kind of looks like a dildo for a controller, but it's the Commodore 64 GS. GS meaning game system. And yeah, they made a console version of the Commodore 64, which sounds like a great idea, right? Because the Commodore 64, it was very, computers are very expensive, and creating a conventional, a stripped down, but a console version, because that's essentially what a console is a stripped down gaming experience, I guess you could say. But it's a more compact, more mainstream version of the Commodore 64, because how many people are very appealed by playing video games on a computer terminal, even back in the 1980s? So this was an attempt to reinvigorate interest in the Commodore platform, because the Commodore, I mean, if consoles were doing bad in the early 80s, in the crash of 83, can you imagine how PC gaming was doing? Not so well. So Commodore, it seems like they had a decent amount going for it, but the high price point, it just didn't appeal to any consumers. So they launched the Commodore 64 GS back in 1990. And at this point, we were full on 16-bit. The Genesis was out. The Super Nintendo was around the corner. But it was 16-bit time. But Commodore decided to go back to the past and release a console version of the Commodore 64. Now, that's not entirely a bad idea, because there are plenty of consoles you will see throughout this ranking that did release a new version of a platform very late into its life cycle, into the next generation, sometimes 2 generations later. And that's not entirely a bad thing. See, a good console redesign is one that knows what it is and does what it does well. But the problem with the Commodore 64 GS is that it was absolutely terrible. Like, would you want a redesign that was not compatible with most games on the original platform? So, well, first of all, the Commodore 64 GS took a completely different format, right? The original 64, the terminal, the PC, so to speak, took in ROMs, like kind of like floppy disks, but not really, but like pretty much they took in like these disk ROMs. The Commodore 64 GS took cartridges. So not only did they have to put the old games onto a new format, which is already a lot to ask for, but a lot of those games that were ported over to the new format were completely broken and did not work at all. So, and this is because the Commodore 64, as you know, it was a computer terminal and you had a lot of keys You had a lot of buttons or keys. So there were certain games that required certain commands and certain keys to be pressed, and to convert that into a console experience where you only have 3 buttons, as you could see, on the damn controller, most games are not going to work. As a matter of fact, most of the games did not even go past the goddamn start screen. Yeah. And to put the icing on the cake was that by 1990, the Commodore 64, the original Commodore 64, was already dirt cheap. This thing was not much cheaper than the actual Commodore 64, making the Commodore 64 GS completely pointless and one of the worst console redesigns ever. Moving on, we have the Neo Geo CD. Now, back in this time period, in the mid-90s, it seemed like everyone had a CD version of their consoles, right? We had the Sega CD, Atari Jaguar CD, and the TurboGrafx CD, although that was actually the very first console that was able to play CD-ROMs, and we will be actually talking about TurboGrafx very shortly in the D category. But the Neo Geo CD was not just a redesign. It was very similar, actually, to the 64 GS in the sense that it was a redesign that took a completely different format from the original. So, as I said earlier, the Commodore 64 GS takes cartridges, as you can see the cartridge slot right here, while the Commodore 64, the original terminal, the PC, took a completely different format. So, similarly, the original Neo Geo took cartridges, but the problem was these cartridges cost a lot of money because these were true ports of the arcade version. The Neo Geo was essentially a premium replica of the arcade experience without having to purchase multiple arcade systems or to actually, to go to Chuck E. Cheese every day and play the games that way. It was a system that was a true, definitive arcade experience. As a matter of fact, the controller was an arcade stick. So that was the entire purpose of the Neo Geo CD, or the original Neo Geo, sorry. But the problem was, because the cartridges were so advanced, because the ports were so advanced in comparison to the other consoles, like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, the cartridges were very expensive. And when I mean expensive, I'm not exaggerating here. I mean like $200, $300, sometimes $400 back then. So now that would be astronomical. I mean, these days, your new console costs $400. Can you imagine a single game costing that much? No, you can't, because it's ridiculous. So that's pretty much the main reason why the Neo Geo was a failure. As amazing as that system was, as innovative as it was with the memory and everything. But the Neo Geo CD, it was not a good redesign, because what they did was that they wanted to do really what Commodore did, was to reinvigorate interest in the platform, because that platform was dead pretty much on arrival. It was unaffordable to the majority of people, and it really didn't. It really had a mostly niche market, although it really was much cheaper than buying individual arcade systems. Still, it was way too expensive for most people. So to remedy this, they decided to redesign the console to only be purposed to play CD-ROMs. Meaning, if you had a Neo Geo already, if you had a library of Neo Geo games, they would not work on the Neo Geo CD. So what would that be? Because it's very similar to the Commodore 64 GS, where a redesign of the same platform is not compatible with the last one. That wouldn't be backwards compatibility, because it's the same generation. It wouldn't be forwards compatibility, because it wouldn't be a previous generation compared to the current generation being cross-compatible. What would we call that? Sideways compatibility? So I guess the Neo Geo CD and Commodore 64 GS are not sideways compatible. I guess I'll be the inventor of that term because I've never heard it before. So, and the reason why you've never heard it, never even heard of this concept, is because it's absolutely ridiculous to redesign a console of the same generation, take a completely different format, so all the games you purchased were pretty much a waste of money. Now, I know the argument you'll be making. Well, the purpose of redesigning is to reinvigorate interest, and for the most part, redesigning a console is really to attract new people and not existing people, right? Like, not people who already purchased the console, but new people. But the problem is when you have two formats for the same platform, the people who already purchased your console, you're obviously going to prioritize the people who are on the new platform, if that makes sense. So, obviously, Neo Geo, they had big plans. They had big plans for the CD. But for them to think that this would actually work made them complete morons. Not only that, I mean, granted, the Neo Geo was a failure, okay? So trying to reinvent a failure and take a completely different format of discs and all that is not inherently a terrible idea. Because if your platform has never been alive, you can't kill it. You know what I mean? So they're trying to revive it or to make it relevant by taking a different format that was much cheaper. Because, as I said, the old cartridges cost about $300, $400 for consumers because they were so damn expensive to make and produce, because they were genuine recreations of the arcade experience, and that they were premium versions of arcade games. But the issue with the Neo Geo CD is that was not just the CDs. I mean, the CD tray was kind of defective. You had a lot of issues reading the CD trays, like the CD tray reading the CDs. So that's a big problem because if the damn thing don't work, then it ain't going to sell well. But I think what killed this thing the most was the time period that it was released. They released the Neo Geo CD in 1994, towards the end of the 16-bit life cycle. So we were already gearing for the 5th generation of consoles. I mean, the following year, the PlayStation 1 came out. And the same year, the Panasonic 3DO came out. And the 3DO was compared heavily to the Neo Geo CD because the Neo Geo CD was pretty expensive. Not quite as much as the 3DO, but they were both gearing for the same audience, the premium gamer, so to speak, because your average Joe ain't gonna pay $600 in the 1990s for a new console. Even today, your average person ain't gonna pay $600 for a new console, as Sony had to learn the hard way. But I think that's what killed Neo Geo the most. I think that's what made this, all those factors that I said before, but I think what really killed it and what prevented it from ever gaining any ground was that they released this goddamn thing in 1994 when people were already moving on to new hardware, because this was not an upgrade. They did not upgrade the hardware. This was not a new generation. This was the same generation, the same version, or a different version of the same platform. It's a shame because that controller is goddamn sexy. That joystick and that button layout. Oh man. It's true. It's one of the best goddamn controllers of that time period. It's a shame because it was a total waste. Because it was a terrible platform. But it was a good platform, but it just... not enough people were able to experience it because of how goddamn expensive it was. And, well, the actual console itself, the redesigned console itself, was terrible. Right? The original Neo Geo probably could have had a lot of success if they were able to keep costs down, but it just it didn't work out for them, and I don't know why they thought that this would have been a good idea, but it just had everything going against it. So that's why the Neo Geo CD is one of the worst console redesigns ever made. Now, to its right, most of you are like, what the hell is this goddamn thing? This piece of shit is called the PSX. It was a redesign of Sony's PlayStation 2. The redesign came out around 2003, so midway between the PlayStation 2's life cycle. And in case you haven't heard of it, there's a reason, because it was only released in Japan and it was a total failure. It's probably the worst redesign ever made out of all of these, because at least out of these four consoles, as terrible as they are, and we will talk about these two very shortly, but at least the rest of these things work, although they're not optimal and they're still pretty effing terrible, and they have like significant problems that make them impossible to recommend. This thing has to stand out from the rest of the pack. Like if there was a double F ranking or a below F, something like that, the PSX would be in a separate category, because, you know, obviously F, there's a wider range. If you get a D, it's kind of like 60 to 69. C is like a 70, B 80, A 90, and S is near perfect. And F can be range anywhere from like a 59 to a 0, right? If we use the same criteria as a university or a school. But these consoles would get like a 50. This would get like a 20 on a test, because it's just awful, downright awful. And the PS2 was such an amazing console, which makes it even more sad. But thankfully, this was not made by Sony Computer Entertainment, which is the PlayStation division as it was referred to back then, SCE. It was not made by them. It was made by the division of Sony that was responsible for making DVD players, televisions. It was pretty much that media division of Sony. And you know what? The PSX actually had a pretty innovative feature, which was the cross media bar. And in case you don't know what the cross media bar is, well, chances are you do. You just didn't know what its actual name was. The XMB, or cross media bar, was the interface of the PSP, the PS3, and the PlayStation Vita. Around the time of the PS4, they kind of still had it, but kind of modernized it a little bit. So I guess the PS4 still kind of has a version of the cross media bar, but it's way more advanced. But the same exact interface of the Vita, PSP, and PS3 was actually in this device, and this was back in 2003. And I remember the XMB being one of my favorite interfaces. It was awesome, but that's the only good thing about this. So that's why it gets like a 20 on the test. It still gets some points, but other than that, it totally fails. So, do you want a console that is overpriced and doesn't work? Because that's essentially what the PSX is in a nutshell. Completely opposite to what a redesign should be, right? Because as we said earlier, a redesigned console should either cut cost or be a way to maintain interest in the platform or create new interest, like increase accessibility to the platform. But the PSX does neither of those things. Because as pathetic as these four consoles are, the PSX makes no real attempt to appeal to a new group of players that otherwise would not be interested in the platform, to reinvigorate interest in the platform. No, this thing doesn't. This piece of shit doesn't do that at all. It fails at everything. That cross media bar that I mentioned before is good, but it doesn't mean anything if the damn thing doesn't work. This console is more defective than an Xbox 360 that came out in 2005. Just think about that for a second. Can you think of a console that's more defective than the 360 was? Well, this thing is even more defective than that. And it would run you about, in today's dollars, $1,000. I mean, I feel bad for any Japanese person that bought this damn thing. It's just awful. So, In case you're wondering why was it so expensive, well, as I said before, this was not actually made by PlayStation or Sony Computer Entertainment, so it was made by a separate division. So that separate division obviously had the interest of turning a profit off of the actual hardware, right? Because they were making a premium media device, so they were expecting to make money off of the hardware, which is all fine and dandy, except really if you're in the console manufacturing business to make money off of the hardware, you're already doing it wrong. 3DO learned that the hard way. Madbox is going to learn that the hard way. But this thing, not only was it premium, okay, because premium consoles do exist, and you will see them very shortly. Well, not too shortly, like around the C ranking and above. But you know, there are such thing as a premium console that adds features to it, and even though it might be a little bit more expensive, the ends kind of justify the means because you get more out of it, and it's still cheaper in the end of the day than like getting a PC or something like that actually is more advanced. Because console manufacturers, the one advantage of being console manufacturer is that you do not make money off of the actual hardware, it's the software. But since the division of Sony that handled this did not give a shit about how well Sony Computer Entertainment was doing and software sales of the PS2, because they didn't make money off of the PS2 doing well, this was really a Sony DVD player that also happened to play PS2 and PS1 games. I think that's the best way to describe it. So that was one reason why it was expensive, because they wanted to make money off of the actual hardware. That's really the most significant reason why it cost so damn much. But also, it came with a 250 gigabyte hard drive because it had DVR capability. So that was the one feature that it added, along with the XMB. But that's the most significant thing that it added, I guess, because that was its selling point. It's a DVR recorder, and back then, DVR recorders were kind of expensive because 250 gigabytes, which is how much it had, that was a lot, and that was very expensive back then. A 250 gigabyte hard drive might be nothing in terms of price to a lot of people these days. But back then, in 2003, it was a lot of money. So they had to make money off of the hardware, and they wanted to include that feature. So that's why it was so damn expensive. As to the question as to why it was defective and didn't work, well, that was Sony in a nutshell in the early to mid 2000s. In the 80s and 90s, they were like a technology conglomerate. I mean, Sony TV, Sony radios, the Walkman. I mean, Sony. If you didn't have a Sony television or a Sony product, you were not having the best product. Now Toshiba and Sanyo and those companies, the quality is much better than anything Sony has come out with recently, and this is really a good example of the rest of Sony that is not PlayStation, and how well they do hardware and how reliable their products are. Yeah, in case you're wondering why Sony's not doing so well, minus the PlayStation brand, that's why. And I think the early 2000s was like the beginning of the downfall for Sony, because for some reason their products just became awful and of low quality, overpriced, and of terrible quality. That was Sony in a nutshell from the early 2000s until modern times, excluding the PlayStation. Although the original fat PS3, might beg to differ. But anyway, that's really the PSX. Not much else to say about it. It was awful. Probably the worst redesign, because there was really no saving grace about it. And chances are, if you bought it, you spent all that money within a week, it would be broken, and there would be no way to fix it. And you'd be wondering, why the hell did I spend an arm and a leg for a piece of shit? Moving on, we got two more consoles in the F tier, and I think these two are exact opposites. So they're both equally as shit, but they have the opposite problem. So the Wii Mini's main problem was that you could not connect to the internet. They took a Wii, stripped away its online capabilities, sold it for $100. Also, obviously, the GameCube compatibility was stripped away, but there was another redesign of the Wii that also stripped away GameCube compatibility to be like a bargain bin Wii that would appeal to casual people who didn't really see any justification in spending hundreds of dollars on a gaming system when really you would mostly you're not really much of a gamer, right? The Wii itself was really marketed towards people who were not otherwise gamers. That's why the Wii sold so damn well, but then the Wii U in comparison sold terribly because it could not connect with those same people that they had before. And by that point, people moved on to different mediums, not gaming consoles, but like iPads and smart devices and all that. So, I like the mobile gaming division really is captivating casuals more than console gaming and PC gaming ever could. So, that's all fine though. Making a console to try to appeal to casual people is fine, and this was towards the end of the Wii's life cycle back in 2012, like right when the Wii U was coming out. And that's not really a problem, but they didn't do it well. Because a lot of people, they would buy a device for the family that could do not just games, but can play movies and connect to the damn internet. So I know some people are going to play devil's advocate and say, well, the Wii's online gaming and online capabilities were stripped away the following year. So even if you did get out of your way and buy a Wii that could connect to the internet, you would lose those functionalities pretty quickly anyway, because they got rid of the Wii Connect 24, which was their online platform where the Wii was always online, always watching, always checking for emails, and it was like a service almost. They kind of got rid of that, and the Wii's online capabilities were not stripped away because you could still connect to Netflix. You could still buy games from the VC. So that still means that the Wii Mini was a total failure because you stripped away a good portion of the game's library. And I know it tried to appeal to casual gamers, to people who otherwise were not gamers, and to try to appeal to new people. But when you strip away their ability to use Netflix and to use it as a multimedia device, because that's what casual people want in a device. They don't want something that could just play games. As casual as the games are, they're going to get tired of the games eventually. They want one device to do multiple things. And this can only play games. It could only play Wii games. It could not play GameCube games or VC games. And the VC and GameCube games were a significant chunk of the Wii's library. So, missing out on really most of the Wii's games, at least more than half of the Wii's games, including WiiWare and all that also. You really had a stripped down experience that was really not a good value, because the thing cost $100 and you'd be like, well, $100, even though it had no internet and all that, at least it was cheap, right? Well, at that point in 2012, you can get a used Wii at GameStop or any other place for well under $100. So you would have all the features, you'd have the backwards compat, you would have all that, but you would not, you'd spend less money than on an inferior version. So that's really, that's why the Wii Mini has got to be one of the worst console redesigns ever. It also stripped away SD cards, so if you wanted to put an SD card, shit out of luck, couldn't do it. And overall, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. There's no saving grace about it. Impossible to recommend. Xbox One S All Digital is the newest redesign. The newest redesign to have ever come out. It came out last month or 2 months ago. I'm not quite sure. But it was very recent. The Xbox One S All Digital has the exact opposite problem as the Wii Mini. So the Wii Mini's huge problem was that it could not connect to the internet. Well, the Xbox One S's big problem is that you can only connect to the internet. I know a lot of people are saying, well, not connected to the internet and having an offline device. Well, you could play games offline. It wasn't like the original plan with the Xbox One, always watching and always looking and having to always be online. It was nothing like that, but you had to have some internet capabilities to use the thing in the first place, because otherwise it would be a brick, because in order to buy games and download games, you obviously have to be connected to the internet because there's no disk drive. And when I first heard the rumors about this, I was thinking to myself, you know what? It could be a decent play by Microsoft, because you could potentially appeal to a group of people who wanted a cheaper device, did not really care about physical media, because there's a lot of people who don't care about physical media, but also people who, because the lower the price, the more accessible it is. I mean, that's the case with anything, right? The cheaper something is, the more accessible it is, and the more people are able to buy it. Can you imagine how many more people would have had a PS3 at launch if it cost something like $300 compared to $600, right? So that's the thing about accessibility, is that the cheaper it is, and even if you do strip away a few features, if it improves accessibility, it still can be a moderately okay, acceptable redesign, because at least it has a damn purpose. All 5 of these consoles have no purpose at all, because not only is it inferior to the previous, to the original iteration of the console, or whatever you want to say with the Commodore, but whatever, the redesign of the original model, at least it did something that made it more accessible. It cut the price, or maybe it even tried to add something in, like the Neo Geo CD that tried to appeal to a new group of people, but it just did not work, and it's completely pointless in purchasing. With the Xbox One S All Digital, it would have been completely fine. It could have even been higher than an F, and even a C. Although I could not have given it anything higher than a C, because, first of all, we're late into the life cycle. So having a digital-only Xbox that would cost $250 is not really you're better off waiting a year, saving up $200 more, and just buying a new console. But accessibility is fine. But this thing cost the exact same price as the Xbox One S. Right now, the Xbox One S with a disc, with physical capabilities, with playing physical games, cost the exact same price as the all digital, making this a total failure and completely unsustainable. Like, what the hell was Microsoft thinking in releasing this damn thing? I saw the advertisements for it. It said Xbox One S all digital, cloud storage, able to download. Yeah, you could do literally every single one of those things on one with a disc tray, and it will cost the exact same. So even if you have no reason at all to have physical media, like you don't go to GameStop, you don't care about physical games, you might as well just buy the one with the physical if it costs the exact same, right? Like, this doesn't appeal to anybody at all if it costs the exact same. And even if it was less, still cannot give it higher than a C, because it still takes away a large library of games. Like, okay, so you have, like, most games are digital now, so it's not the case of, like, preserving gaming history or anything like that, because mostly everything has been translated into the digital age. But let's say your friend's like, you have an Xbox and your friend has an Xbox and he loans you a copy of the game. You can't use it, you're going to have to pay for it. It's just stuff like that doesn't really make it cost effective. So it really wouldn't have been higher than a D or a C, really. I think a C might have even been too generous for it. So, yeah, this is one of the worst redesigns ever. Makes no sense. Why does this thing exist? I understand why it would exist if it was cheaper, but it's not. So what the hell was Microsoft thinking? It's just awful. And maybe in time they'll fix it and make it cut the price significantly, but it doesn't seem like that's gonna happen. So we'll see. But as it stands right now, it's an F. If you're watching this in the future and they cut the price to like $199, it still gets a D because of that fact. Because of the inconvenience. Because even if you don't like physical media, you're still cutting yourself off from so many opportunities to have discounts on physical games. Even if you don't like physically going to stores, you can get it shipped to your door, and your friend can loan it to you without you having to pay anything, making it completely pointless and irrational to buy this thing. And anyone who's ever bought this thing, I'm sorry to say, I usually don't I don't like insulting people really, but you're an idiot. You're a total idiot if you ever bought this. So wow, okay, that was we spent a long time talking about the F tier, and we haven't even gotten started. So this is going to be longer than I possibly could have imagined. Okay, so we got the Fairchild Channel F Model 2. This thing tried to compete with the Atari, and was kind of like a slimmer, sleeker version of the Fairchild, but it really didn't do much differently. It was kind of a situation of too little too late. Although they tried to, they cut the price and made it a little bit more affordable. Still really was no reason to buy a Fairchild at the point that was released in the early to mid 1980s, when we were close to reaching a video game crash, and the Fairchild didn't really have an impressive library of games. So if you bought it, even if it was relatively cheap, you would have been very disappointed. So the Fairchild Channel F does not really deserve anything higher than a D. It was functional, it worked, it didn't have significant problems like compatibility issues with a lot of these, but at the same time, you couldn't have said it was anything above a D, and beyond barely passable, because it didn't do anything. Like it really was kind of irrelevant from the beginning, too little too late. So that's the Fairchild Channel F Model 2. That's a big mouthful, but that's what it was. It's worth a D. Next to it, we have the TurboGrafx 16, it was really the PC Engine, which was the TurboGrafx 16 Japan, the PC Engine Shuttle. So this was trying to appeal to children, because it had the controller kind of looks like a space shuttle, and it looks kind of like a cool little toy to appeal to kids. It was slimmer, sleeker, a little bit cheaper. So it was trying to appeal to families trying to that want to buy to buy a game system for children that wasn't a Super Nintendo, or not a Super Nintendo. This came out in '89. Not as expensive as the Genesis, because this was the 16, so it was 16-bit, but also price comparable to the Famicom that was out for a number of years at that point, and was dirt cheap by the time we reached 1989. The issue with this was that although it worked, it didn't have any huge problems. It did have one compatibility problem with the CD. It was completely incompatible with the CD, the TurboGrafx CD. Not really a good move, because you're selling a redesigned console while taking away the feature that you've been pushing for so long, like the CD add-on. You released the CD add-on the same year as you released a redesigned console that didn't even have the capabilities of using that add-on. So how would you expect that add-on to do well? Like, you would either have it one way. The add-on would do well, or the redesign would do well, but it could not be both. Because if the redesign did very well, and spoiler alert, both of them failed. But if the redesign did well, everyone would have the redesigned console, and the CD would be obsolete, because everybody would already have, everyone would have the console that would not even be compatible with the add-on you were trying to sell. So it made absolutely no sense to release something that was incompatible with the add-on. Now, some people may say, well, the add-on sucked. And it really much did. It was innovative, the TurboGrafx CD. We might talk about it next month. Next month we might talk about add-ons, because it's another interesting topic. But this thing was just a total failure. Not a total failure, because it was still a competent redesign. Like it was slightly reduced priced. It was kind of efficient, and I guess kids would like the rocket ship design to it, and would kind of like be drawn to that. But it still can't be recommended because of that fact, and it really was a bad move on the part of TurboGrafx, because it was their business model was conflicting. You can't sell two different things, that if one thing did well, then the other thing would do bad. Because if the CD was doing well, then there would be no reason to buy a redesigned console that wasn't compatible with it. So it was just all around bad idea, and it just was poorly timed as well, because it was timed with the CD, and overall it was not good. And it probably was one of the main reasons why the TurboGrafx failed, was conflicting marketing. So yeah, and this was also Japanese exclusive. So in case you haven't seen it, chances are you're too young. Well, I'm also young, but I kind of look into this stuff. But you're either too young or you're not Japanese. It's two of those things. Because this thing was made in like 1989. So this is a 30-year-old redesign. Next to it, we have the Wii Family model. So I could not rank the Wii Family to an F, only because it's still better than having a Wii Mini. Because at least you can connect the goddamn thing to the internet. The big problem with the Wii Family Edition is that they cut the price to about like $150. I think it was actually like $130 or something like that. So it was really dirt cheap. But this was also in 2011, so at that point the Wii was already really cheap. You get a used Wii for cheaper than the Family model, and it took away GameCube support. As you can see, they literally just took a regular Wii, knocked it over, and made it horizontal instead of vertical. And that's all the Wii Family is. It's a little bit cheaper. They took away the GameCube functionality, which was not only bad in the sense that you could not play GameCube games, but a lot of controls, the Wii Motion Control and the Classic Control, are both awful with a lot of games. The GameCube controller is really the only sensible option, and not even be able to use that controller. And there are also some games that even require the GameCube controller, so they would not work properly. Which is not a good idea. So, I think this was, it had a purpose, and it met that purpose a little bit at least. They cut the price and whatever, and I guess it kind of worked. I guess some people bought into this, but overall it's just not a good redesign, because I don't really care about them like not even changing the look and just knocking it over and flipping the logo from vertically to horizontally. That like I said, I don't really care about aesthetic, but it just didn't really serve any main purpose. Like, if you're really just better off with a regular Wii, because it was just a Wii that could not play GameCube games. That's just about it. Nothing completely terrible, but nothing really good or even okay either. It's just there. Next to it, we have the PlayStation 3 Super Slim, and it's an even slimmer version of the PS3 Slim. So this is the second redesign, and there's an unwritten rule. There's an unwritten rule in the video game industry where if a console is on its second redesign, chances are it's not going to be very good, because usually if they don't get the redesign right the first time around, they're probably not going to even bother redesigning it, because chances are the console was a failure. And if they redesign it the second time, they're just trying to keep maintaining interest in the platform, because that's what the point of redesign is. But the problem is that particular redesign, the PlayStation 3 Slim and the Xbox 360e, really, they both really have the same problem here. Released very late into the life cycle and not cost efficient at all. There's literally no reason to buy this thing. The PlayStation 3 Super Slim came out in 2012, a year before the arrival of the PS3. It was this new, hot, sleek, and slimmer version. Really, there was no significant problems with the PS3 Slim to think about. I mean, my PS3 Slim is still working 10 years later, and has had no problems whatsoever, so it's not like they were trying to fix hardware problems. But even if they did, it would still be too little too late. But the fact that it was kind of late and it didn't really do anything, the Super Slim let's go over the price of the Super Slim, because that's really where the problem comes in. Because Sony had an opportunity to really compete with Nintendo's Wii U during that holiday season that year. They really could have capitalized on the Wii U's mediocre sales during its lifetime and during that particular time. They could have released a console that was cheaper than the Wii U. But instead, they released a 6-year-old console that was just as expensive as the Wii U. That was a new console at that point. Made absolutely no sense. What would be the point of spending $300 for a new console? And it was 500 gigabytes for the new console. So you'd be like, well, 500 gigabytes is a lot. Sure. And yes, the Wii did have embarrassing memory. You had to spend $350 for 32 gigabytes of storage, which is just, Nintendo is notorious for just being embarrassing with their memory storage. Just being really stingy when it comes to their the built-in hard drive. The Switch has no memory. The Wii U has no memory. The Wii was actually acceptable, and so was the GameCube. But man, the Wii U and Switch are just awful when it comes to that. But the PlayStation 3 Super Slim, although it has more storage, the average consumer isn't going to know that. You know what I mean? Like, if they're going to see PlayStation 3, $300, but it's 500 gigabytes, and they're gonna, and Wii U Pro, or whatever it was called, the Wii U Deluxe, which is $350 and only 32 gigabytes, and I think the $300 Wii U was 8 gigabytes, which is just, wow, awfully embarrassing. But be that as it may, they're not going to really know about that or care about that. They're going to know the PS3 is an old platform, so releasing an old console as the same version, a different version of the same console, that really the only thing that it had was that it looked different, and it didn't have a disc slot that, like, you insert the disc in it and it goes through, like the Wii or the PSX. It was kind of like you put it in through a top, and it's kind of like the PS2 Slim in that way, except that instead of the tray ejecting, it slides. So that was the whole thing that the PS3 Super Slim had. But its price made no sense. This was a year before the new consoles were out. The PS3 at that point was old, and you can get a PlayStation 3 Slim at that point for a comparable price point. I don't think the PS3 Slim was more expensive at all. I think it was the same price. The PS3 Super Slim was the same price in 2012 as the PS3 Slim was, 500 gigabytes, in like 2010. Like, it just didn't make any sense. And the 250 gigabyte was only $30 cheaper. So if you wanted a 250 gigabyte PS3 Slim, it would be a hell of a lot cheaper than the PS3 Super Slim. It would be around the same price and even cheaper if it's used. So it makes absolutely no sense to buy this. Made absolutely no sense. Made no reason to exist. Wasn't particularly bad. Like, it did everything fine. It still had the PS1 backwards compatibility, and it still had everything that the PS3 Slim had. It wasn't really a downgrade, but it's just, what did this thing do? It looks sexy. It just was a new model. That's all it was. It was a new design. And if you care about looks, if you're willing to spend $300 for a console because it looks different, then you're the type of sucker that would buy this. And I guess that's who Sony was marketing it towards. But it could have had a lot of potential. Redesign it, make it a little bit more cost effective and compete with the Wii U, and extend the PS3's longevity by competing with the Wii U. But I guess at that point, they didn't really care if people bought it or not because they were focused on the PS3. I don't know. But this thing was just, why did this exist? Xbox 360e, same exact situation. They released the Xbox 360e. They announced it at E3 2013. That shit show with the always online DRM, Don Matrick. That was probably the one of the worst E3 presentations in history. But the Xbox 360e, as shitty as it was not even close to being one of the worst announcements. Although the redesign was kind of dumb, and it really had no reason to exist. The Xbox One, the always online thing, that was just a train wreck. But they announced a new revision of the Xbox 360 that this was the main purpose of an Xbox 360, the E model, the redesign of the Slim. It was a little bit smaller, a little bit more quiet, although the Xbox 360 Slim really didn't have any problems with being loud. But its whole selling point, get this, it looks like an Xbox One. We redesigned it because it looks like an Xbox One and it looks cool. There's your Xbox 360e. It's very similar to the PS3 Slim in the sense that the whole selling point was it looks cool, and yeah, it looks cool. Buy it. Like, it was still overpriced for what it was in the time period it was released, because the Xbox 360e model was $300 for a 250 gigabyte console. So it was even more of a ripoff than the PS3 Super Slim. But I could not give it an F because it still worked. It still was a working Xbox 360. Like, these things were just downright defective in a lot of ways and were just total failures. But at least if you got a 360e, you had a working 360. It's not like you had any significant problems. And I guess most of the people who bought these consoles kind of knew what they were getting in for, so I guess that's fine. But you can't really rank it higher than a D, because it's just like, why does this thing exist? $300 for a new console. Like, for an old console that was 8 years old at that point. Selling it for $300. Yeah. Anyone who bought this thing, it just, I'm sure you would have been disappointed, because it just was overpriced. It was towards the end of the console's life cycle, and it looks cool, and that's why you should buy it. That's why the Super Slim and the 360e are just not good redesigns and are worth a D ranking. So the C ranking are okay redesigns that do add a few good things and are a little bit cost effective in some ways and do have some advantages to them over the original model, actually. But the cons kind of outweigh the pros a little bit, or maybe the pros outweigh the cons just a tad bit, or it just about breaks even. I guess that it's just about breaks even, I think, is how we can describe the C ranking. It had potential, but it just could not be, it wasn't executed properly, but you could not say that it was as bad as these consoles that we talked about so far. So, let's talk about the C tier. So we have a few consoles over here. We have the Sega Master System Model 2, and it was called the Sega Master System 2, and same thing with the Fairchild Channel F. It was called the Fairchild Channel F2. Back then, if a console was called 2, it was actually a redesign, not a new generation of consoles. So back then, if Sony made a PlayStation back in the late 70s, mid 80s, the PlayStation 2 would have most likely been a redesign, because that's how they distinguished a redesign from the original model. But the new generation would be called something completely different. That's really that was the trend that was really set for a while, until Sony came in with the PlayStation and Microsoft with the Xbox. Now most consoles are they use the same exact brand but different models. I guess that makes sense with Sony and Microsoft, because they're technology companies. Like, they extend beyond gaming. So this is Sony PlayStation. You know, it's Sony PlayStation, as opposed to Nintendo Wii, Nintendo Switch. But Nintendo is the brand. But Microsoft and Sony had to create gaming brands that gamers could identify with. So I guess that made sense. But the Master System 2 the issue with it that I had was that the Master System 1 could have used some significant improvements, but they just decided to create a slimmer, cheaper version of the Master System 2. And there was nothing necessarily wrong with the Master System 2. It had a decent library. It didn't really make any improvements, though, like to the actual hardware. And it really could have used some improvements, but I think I gave it a C because it doesn't make too many compromises. Like, it's not like inferior to the original model, but it doesn't really do anything to improve it. And what I mean by improvements was with the new Master System 2 that came out in 1990, at the point where it was pretty much a standard feature for the console for you to be able to pause the console with your controller. But with the Master System 2, you still had to get up off of your ass and get up to the console and press pause. This button right here was the pause button. And you still had to get up and pause it, which was an exact pain in the ass. It totally took away the mood. I guess if you had like the console, the TV right in front of you and the console like under a shelf, you could just kind of like put your big toe on it and it would pause. But that's still really not like practical. So at the end of the day, it's not a good redesign because it could have it had a lot to be desired, but it wasn't a bad redesign either. And for the price point of $50, you really couldn't go wrong with it. It just was kind of disappointing. So that's why it deserves a C ranking. Next to it is the Sega Genesis 3. Now, I made a point to not include third-party redesigns because there were a few redesigns or knockoff consoles that were released at that point that were, you could call redesigns. So like Coleco made a redesigned Atari 2600, but I decided not to redesign it because it was not officially sanctioned by the manufacturer itself. Actually, there was a lawsuit between Coleco and Atari, which is pretty interesting. But the Genesis 3, although it was made by a company called Majesco, it was called the Sega Genesis 3. Like, it had its name and had its full endorsement for this. And I really can't say it was a totally bad redesign, but I can't say it was a good one either. It did have some advantages, but it did have a good number of disadvantages as well. So, similar to the PC Engine Shuttle, this thing was incompatible with add-ons, so you cannot use the 32X, you cannot use the CD because it did not have the component to attach it to. So it did not work. It was not compatible with the Sega CD and 32X add-ons. So if you were a video game enthusiast, chances are you would want to have those add-ons, and there would really be no reason to have it. But although, you know, these cheaper, more cost-effective models are really not for hardcore gamers. It's to introduce new people into the platform, which is all fine and dandy. But not having that was a little bit of a problem. There were also certain games, like on the Genesis proper, that did not work functionally. So there was Virtua Racer that did not work, which was essentially like Sega's version of Gran Turismo back then. Very popular arcade racer back then. Did not work on the Genesis Mark III. Also, there was another game called Gargoyles that did not work. And from what I understand, it had something to do with the original Genesis having a bug in the system, and the Genesis 3 fixed that bug, but those games that I just mentioned actually utilized that bug in the game. So when the bug was gone, the game was essentially non-functional, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, some games not working, the add-ons being incompatible, and also, how about the overall quality of the Genesis 3? It feels cheap. Like, I usually don't care about how the thing looks if it doesn't really make any compromises, but this really does kind of have a kind of knockoff feel to it, which again doesn't automatically qualify it as a C, but when it takes features away and feels cheap, it's, you know, you can't say it's a good redesign. And at that point, you know, the accessibility thing is cool and all, but at that point we were in 1998. where the Genesis was already really cheap. And you probably could have gotten one used for as much as the new Genesis was, and people even like people were just done with 16-bit at that point. I guess it was a good collector's item, but beyond that, not really. As a matter of fact, if you go on eBay right now, you will find the Genesis Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3 for similar price points. So, at the end of the day, it really didn't do anything for the Genesis platform. But the one advantage it did have that I have to include here, that probably makes it a C and not a D, because the criteria I just mentioned kind of puts it in camp with the PS3 and the Xbox 360e, because it was kind of underwhelming. It worked decently, but it was overall it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either, and it was kind of borderline bad. But it was a working Genesis. The sound quality and everything was virtually up to snuff with the original model. It didn't make too many compromises with the actual compared to the actual way that the game's played. But the one advantage that it did have was its region lock free status. It could play Japanese Mega Drive games. So if you're into Japanese games and you don't want to buy another Genesis, one Genesis you could play everything, and that was a big plus, because the Mega Drive cartridges were different in Japan than the Genesis / European Mega Drive cartridges, so it would not be compatible. It's not like I guess they did that on purpose, because why else would they have different cartridges that weren't compatible? But it was kind of a weird thing. But the Genesis 3 actually was region lock free, because at that point Sega probably didn't give a shit about the Genesis. They were on their way to the Dreamcast at that point, so yeah. But overall, the Genesis 3 was an okay redesign. It did add that cool thing to it, but it also took a good amount away, the add-on capabilities. So overall, it was a trade-off. The pros and the cons are kind of even. So I kind of have to give it a C, and nothing higher or lower than that. It was just your average redesign. Nothing else to say. Next to it, we have the Panasonic Cube, or the Panasonic GameCube, or the GameCube that could play DVDs. That's the most simple way to explain it. Yeah, it's a GameCube that could play DVDs. It was made by Panasonic, though Nintendo authorized it to. So I consider it to be a redesign, because it was a redesign of the GameCube. In case you're wondering why Panasonic was allowed to redesign the GameCube, was because Panasonic actually developed the disc reader system that the original GameCube had. So part of that deal was we'll be allowed to redesign the GameCube and release our own version of it. Not too dissimilar from Nintendo's deal with Philips, where they worked with Philips to release to make a sound card for the SNES. And that was a whole interesting thing. They turned down that they had a deal with Sony, and Sony expected to have a close relationship with Nintendo, and then Nintendo stabbed them in the back at the last minute and decided, no, we're partnering with Philips. And if that never happened, we would have never seen a PlayStation. So it's just crazy to think, just to spite Nintendo, they created a PlayStation because they wanted to work with Nintendo. They wanted to get involved with video games, but they didn't want to make their own platform. So Sony, we want to work with Nintendo. Nintendo blindsided them. And then we want to work with Sega. Sega just laughed at them. So it's you know what? Screw you guys. We're going to compete with you, and we're going to make you wish that you didn't turn us away. And that's what they did. But it was a lot less messy with compared to Philips, because Philips was allowed to use Nintendo properties and make really crappy games. This was nothing like that, and it was actually an okay redesign. It wasn't good or it wasn't great, and it was nowhere near bad. But the issue was that it was a good concept, though the DVD player was not very reliable. Not as unreliable as the PSX, but it has some problems. It was just overall annoying. I mean, the DVD player, sometimes it would have problems working properly. It was not as durable and reliable as the PS2's DVD player even. But the thing is, there were other problems with it as well. Like, for example, if you want to switch between DVD mode and GameCube mode, you couldn't just insert the disc that is relevant to what you want to do. You have to actually, like, put settings up on the thing and physically change on the system itself to DVD mode or GameCube mode, or else the thing will not work. So if you're on GameCube mode, your DVDs won't work, and vice versa. So it was kind of a little bit clunky. It was a little bit awkward. It was only $100 more than the GameCube, so it was very much comparable to the PS2 having the built-in DVD player. So it had that feature that was good, and overall, if you bought it, it wouldn't have been like a total ripoff or anything like that. And it had its purpose, and that was a huge disadvantage that the GameCube had, was no DVD support. Not only because of the people wanting a DVD player back then, and people buying a PS2 instead of a GameCube because they wanted to have one device where they could play movies and everything. Nintendo with the Wii Mini didn't seem to learn that lesson. But the thing is with the GameCube, with the Panasonic Q, with the GameCube, that also made the DVD player, no DVD player, another disadvantage was the fact that the discs were smaller. It was their own proprietary disc, and although it was more protective against piracy because they really cared about that, at the same time it was also a huge problem with storage. So GameCube discs usually were a little bit more stripped down than their PS2 and Xbox counterparts. So usually multi-platform games were, I wouldn't say worse on the GameCube, because there were a lot of technical problems with the PS2. So I'd say it was about even, but the GameCube could have had a lot more third-party support if they didn't have that crappy controller, and if they just had damn DVD support, because the install base would have been higher. It would have been not just some obscure redesign by Panasonic, and that probably those are probably the two things that killed Nintendo. Not killed Nintendo. Nintendo's doing really good right now. That killed the GameCube, and really made it lag behind the PS2. If it had the damn DVD player, it would have had a larger install base, and it would have had more third party support because of the increased DVD space, the storage space, and more capabilities with the games, and more willing to work with Nintendo to release the game on their platform and not have to go through hurdles to make it work on that little disc. But also, more people would be having the console because more people bought the PS2 because of the DVD player. So larger install base is important. But yeah, the Panasonic Q was not really a good solution to that problem. It was more like a half solution. So because it was a half solution, it's kind of like halfway through this ranking. It was just not good, not bad, just okay. Fine. Next to it, we have the PlayStation 2 Slim. Now, this might be a little bit controversial because a lot of people that I know love the PS2 Slim. But I thought that the PS2 Slim was a piece of shit. The one thing that it had over the PS2, the fat PS2, was its built-in modem. So you didn't have to buy a separate modem to connect to the internet. But this thing was just poorly made. It didn't make, like, it functioned like a PS2, and it being smaller is neither a good thing nor a bad thing, really, at the end of the day. So I don't really think smaller size is really a factor alone to make it better. I guess people could say the fat PS2 was too big, but having a smaller, less durable, less reliable console in return is not a fair trade-off, in my opinion. So that's why the PS2 Slim deserves a C, because it was not a good redesign. It worked. It didn't take away features or anything like that. Nothing of the sort. And it's pretty impressive that they were able to condense it down to such a small size and keep everything in it and actually make it a little bit cheaper and more cost efficient. So that's pretty impressive. But I'll tell you one thing. I went through 3 PS2 Slims, and the PS2 Fat version that I have still works many years later. The the PS2 Slim is just cheap. It's easy to break. That lid to open instead of the disc tray. I mean, people say that the PS2 Fat had a lot of disc read error problems, but what I found with the PS2 Slim is that the disc thing was just the disc reader was just so cheaply made, it just stopped working after a while. So I guess a lot of it when it comes to the ranking also has to do with personal experience, right? Because I do have a lot of personal experience with the PS2 Slim. And some other people may have had no problems whatsoever with the PS2 Slim and say, wow, you ranked it way too low. But with my personal experience with the PS2 Slim, I cannot rank it higher than a C. I would recommend the Fat PS2 almost any time over the PS2 Slim. Because it was more durable, it was more reliable, and yeah, the PS2 Slim may have been a little bit quieter or whatever, but and smaller. So if you care so much about size and all that, fine, get a PS2 Slim. But that's really the only thing that it has over the Fat PS2. But you can't say it's a bad redesign, but you also can't say it's a good one. To its right is the PlayStation 4 Pro. Now this was released in 2016, kind of like a midway between the 8th and 9th generation, an upgraded PlayStation 4, but very disappointing to say the least. Yes, games did run better on the PS4 Pro, but the problem was the whole marketing thing was that finally 4K gaming, but the 4K was checkerboarded and wasn't real 4K compared to its competitor Microsoft, whose Xbox One X was actually like true 4K and most of the time was not checkerboard. But every time the PS4 Pro came out with a game, it was always checkerboarded. So it was good. Like the games definitely looked better in a lot of cases, but not significantly to the point where this thing is worth buying. I do think the design was kind of clever. It's the same model. It's the same design as the PS4 Slim, except it's like it looks like two PS4s. It's like double the power of the PlayStation. I thought that was really smart, but it was just kind of lackluster because besides the fake 4K, most games don't even take advantage of this feature of the upgraded PS4 Pro thing, like of the upgraded capabilities of the PS4 Pro. You will find in most cases there is absolutely no difference because it's up to the developers to choose whether or not they're going to enhance the game. So a lot of cases you will see the same exact frame rate, the same exact resolution on the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, making this pretty disappointing. Games sometimes look better, never looked worse, obviously, because it was a more powerful version of the PS4. But it was really nothing to sing about. It didn't really do anything particularly well. What it tried to do, its competition did a lot better, much better, much better than the PS4 Pro. But you can't say it was bad. It was just disappointing. So that's the PS4 Pro. So, the next four, we have the Super Nintendo 2. This console, I liked it. I thought it was good. I thought it was practical. It's really what your ideal redesign console should be. It was cheaper. It only cost $100, and back then that was significantly cheaper than the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and even Nintendo's own Nintendo 64. So you were paying much less than half the price than of the modern console. So it was more accessible. It was slimmed down a little bit, and the model was changed, but it didn't really make too many compromises. The only one thing that kind of makes it a B and not higher was that it didn't really do anything besides lowering the price to make it more accessible, or to make it more appealing. to keep interest in the platform, because usually you have a lot of these consoles that release models later but also have like cool little features to make it more unique. And you'll see more what I'm saying in the A ranking, because there's no context to what I'm saying right now, but you'll see when we get to A. But the B was good. It was just the typical NES, a Super Nintendo that was a little bit smaller and cheaper, more accessible, because of really cheap price, $100, cheaper manufacturing costs, and it was really what your ideal, for the most part, what your ideal redesign should look like and what should be. The one flaw though would be the RF output instead of AV, which was kind of sucky, but overall, it was a good redesign. Not too much to complain about. Not too much to go crazy about either. It was just good. It didn't really make too many compromises to the original model, and it was practical. And that you really can't ask too much more from a redesign. Although some go above the extra mile, and we will talk about them. Next to it, we have similarly the Genesis Mark II. Although the Super Nintendo 2 was released in 1997, so this was really like past the point of the fourth generation. But Genesis, midway into the life cycle, maybe a little bit later, like I think it was like 1993, they decided to redesign the original Genesis. And it was a good redesign. It cut down manufacturing costs. It really didn't wasn't really significantly cheaper though. Like the cost wasn't really offset to the consumer. Like they didn't really see the benefits of the lower price. It was just cheaper for them to manufacture for the most part. Although it did have some cool little things to it. So it supported, instead of mono sound, it supported stereo sound, but it also removed the headphone jack. So if you cared about the headphone jack, if you were playing your Genesis in nighttime in your room and you didn't want to hear, and your parents didn't want to hear the video games, like, or if you were doing it while you weren't supposed to, headphone jack was kind of useful. But in this situation, that was taken away. So for the few people who used it, I guess it's kind of a bit of a bummer. But for the most part, it was a good redesign, and you can't say it was mediocre or anything like. It was good. The stereo sound was nice, although the sound was a little bit cleaner on the original one. Stereo is still, in my opinion, always better than mono. So I enjoyed that aspect of the Genesis 2. And the sound issue is really minor. Like if you were in an audiophile, you really couldn't tell the difference between the sound. So that really doesn't take too many points away from it. But it also isn't really like nothing great to it either. It's just a remodel. Like you can't really say anything bad about it. You could say a few things good about it because it at least does add a couple things to it, like the stereo sound functionality. But overall, it's a good redesign. I can't really complain too much about it. To its right is a similar situation with the PlayStation 4 Slim. The PS4 Slim and the PS4 Pro were released in conjunction with one another. As you can see, this is literally two PS4 Slims put together, so it's like double the power. I still think that, like, in terms of aesthetics, that's really smart. The PS4 Slim is a good redesign. Similar to the Genesis, though, it didn't really need one, because the PS4 was good from the beginning, although there was one little problem with the PS4 that they did fix: physical buttons. They added physical buttons to like a physical eject button, a physical power button. I hated that motion sensor. That PS4 will not stop beeping right now, and I hate it. And that's because the sensor's fucked up. With physical buttons, you really don't have that problem as much as these sensors and all that. Or if I don't even need to touch it. If I just go put my foot near it, sometimes it could just turn itself off, and that's annoying. So I like that. And that's a good part of the PS4 Slim, but it's kind of like 3 years after the fact. It didn't really desperately need a redesign, so you can't say it was great. It was good. It didn't really take too much away, although for some people who had a certain headphone slot, like a certain audio port that they used for a lot of their expensive headphones, it was incompatible with the PS4 Slim. So a good amount of headphones, like high-end ones that cost like $100, did not actually work. So that was a bit of a bummer if you were in that situation. But overall, it was a competent redesign. I guess it was a good way to market the PS4 versus the PS4 Pro, like slim it down and double it. And this, like, I thought that was a clever redesign for the PS4 Pro. So the Slim, I guess, the purpose of redesign was mainly to market the Pro. Weirdly enough, I think that was their main purpose, because the PlayStation 4 was good enough as it already was. It didn't really need a redesign. It was one of that's the thing. Shouldn't take it as an insult if you love your Xbox One S, if you love your PlayStation 4 Pro. The chances are the ones that are higher rank, especially the S rank, really need a redesign more than anything else. So if the redesign is lower ranked, chances are it was already good and didn't really need one, like the PS2 and the PS4. Or in some cases it could have used improvements but didn't really improve that much, or overall was just like okay, like the Genesis 3. But the Genesis 2 and PS4 Slim were redesigns of already good consoles, of already great designs. So we can't really rank them higher than it'd be, because it can't be too much. It can't be like an A ranking, and it can't be like overall amazing. You can't put it in that category when you didn't really need one in the first place. But it doesn't make any compromises, and it doesn't, like, it's not a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if anything I said actually made sense, but that's my rationale for putting it. Like, there was no durability problems, because some of these had some durability problems. This was just disappointing. And then these just had, some of these had a bit of both, but usually it was just like completely obsolete. Like, no, why does this thing exist? It's just like completely pointless, because at least this is midway in the life cycle and it kind of makes sense to redesign it. But, you know, even the ones released later, if they're redesigned, they're more practical, they're cheaper to manufacture, cheaper on the consumer, and overall, like, makes more sense. But I don't know. So these ones are good. The Xbox One S is literally just, it's the Xbox One. The Xbox One S all digital is the same exact model and everything. Just this one actually has a disc tray. So the actual Xbox One S is good, but the all digital one is terrible, because, like I said, it costs the same, and the Xbox One S is a good improvement. Not excellent, but good. So the Xbox One was not a terrible design to begin with. The size, I usually don't talk about size, but damn was that original Xbox One unreasonably huge. I don't know why it was so damn big, but it was. So slimming it down a little bit didn't hurt. Certainly not. But it was good. It was not amazing. It just made it sleeker, slimmer. But it also had the HDR support. And you're also able to stream video on Netflix in 4K. So that's pretty damn good. But I just could not rank it along with the ones in the A rank. Because although it adds, you know, those extra features to it, it's still not quite A material. And you'll get what I'm saying in a second right now, because we're going to talk about the A rank. These are among the best redesigns, and you'll see them right now. So, to start off, we have the Intellivision 2, another following on the trend back then, where if you release a redesigned console, you name it 2. And the Intellivision 2 was really the first of its kind, and that's why I'm putting it up there. It was sleeker, it was slimmer. The controller was the number pad was a little bit of a little bit lower quality than the original, but the cords were longer. because those cords were like way too short. That the kind of like telephone cord, because every controller back then was kind of like a telephone because it had a number pad on it. It was, but the cords were longer, so you didn't have to like be really too close to the TV. So that was a good thing, and it also was compatible with an add-on called the System Changer that allowed you to actually play all of the Atari 2600 cartridges on it. So you got practicality. It's slimmer, it's sleeker, it's more cost efficient, and it was really the first console, one of the first consoles that actually did this. But it made sense, and it actually had added features to it. So what can go wrong? What can you go wrong with that? It's what a redesign should be. It should make improvements, like the longer cords and everything, and also and adding stuff onto it can't hurt. Not add stuff to it though that requires that hurts the people who own the last console. And none of those consoles are in this list, but new 3DS. That's an example where there's certain games that are only compatible on the new version, or actually, one of them was on the list, the Neo Geo CD. Yeah, I've been doing this for so long, I'm kind of like losing my mind here. But this was a good redesign. Really, really good redesign. You can't go wrong with more practical design with an added bonus of playing games on your competitor's platform. I mean, you'll never see that again, but that's pretty awesome. And speaking of its competitor, we have the Atari 2600 Slim, Junior, as it's commonly referred to, but it's essentially a slimmer version of the Atari 2600. The reason why I ranked it so high was because this was really effective, more effective than these other ones, although it really was the same practical purpose of the PS2 Slim and the PS3 Super Slim and all that. It did it a lot better than the other ones because the Atari 2600 Junior was released in '86, years following the crash, or really like right off the crash, and right when Nintendo got into the picture. Atari decided to redesign the 2600 to kind of like have one last go with the 2600, and it actually worked, and it was pretty remarkable considering how Atari was pretty much run to the ground at that point. How Atari, you can't say Atari single-handedly caused the video game crash, but they were the leader of the industry at that point and did not do much to stop it. Part of it was investing so much money into these games that were just terrible, like E.T. and Pac-Man. But this was actually a really good redesign at its time. Went with the new consoles coming out, obviously had newer hardware. The Nintendo, the NES's technological capabilities is significantly better than the 2600. So, although they were both technically 8-bit machines, the NES and Master System could process more pixels in the same screen, and the games played better, functioned better, and were overall better on the new console. But to remedy this, Atari decided to redesign the 2600. This is almost like 10 years, almost a decade after the damn thing was out, and after a pretty horrible crash that almost killed the industry. They were able to revitalize the platform. They actually had new games released on the 2600 because this thing was pretty damn successful. Because at that time, it was $50, which was like a third of the price of the NES. So significantly cheaper. Didn't make any compromises at all. It was the exact 2600 that you remember. It had the same function, it was actually a little bit more reliable. So more reliable and cheaper. Who can go wrong with that? Because as technology improves, they're able to do that. They're able to release sometimes systems that are better but also don't make any compromises, because 1977 was when the 2600 was originally concocted. So 86 was almost a full decade later, so they were able to do that, and it worked great. And this was really one of the first truly successful redesigns, and it was great. And I think if you're an enthusiast and you plan on and you want to like collect retro consoles, I would say that you buy the 2600 Junior. I actually think it's the best version of all of them. Now, some Atari people might come at me, say, well, why, that's a good redesign. Why didn't you talk about the force switch and the light switch and the heavy sixer and all these different models, the Darth Vader model? Yeah, we're not doing that because it's kind of redundant. I'm also not including the 2800 because it's technically a Japanese version of the 2600. Although it's technically a redesign, it's still a region-specific version of it. Like, that was specifically for that version. So, like, if this thing did better, this could have hit the States, the PSX. And the Panasonic Q also, could have done that if it was more successful. But they just weren't. That's why they were region exclusive. It had more to do with that than anything else. But, yeah, I'm not talking about the other Atari models because they're essentially the same. The force switch and the 6 switch are really very similar to each other, and they really don't deserve a real distinction to mention here. So that's the 2600 Junior. Next to it is the NES Top Loader. This was the first redesign by Nintendo, or the first of many. They did the Super Nintendo, but notice they didn't do the N64 and the GameCube because those consoles did not do well. They only redesigned successful consoles because they went straight to the Wii, and if that doesn't tell you that we're going to see a Switch redesign, then I don't know what else will. There's still people who think that they're not going to redesign the Switch. Of course they are. And I hope they do, because the Switch has a lot of problems. But the NES Top Loader was similar to the 2600 Junior. It didn't make any compromises to the original hardware, because they were able to do that because the hardware was old at that point. So they can kind of like, release the same hardware even if they, make it cheaper, but it still doesn't feel inferior to the original. And overall, I also think the top loading thing is better because instead of inserting the cartridge into like the middle, you insert it through the top. That's hence where the name Top Loader comes from, similar to the original Super Nintendo. And also the SNES 2 didn't have that awful yellow shade. I forgot to mention that. So that's another plus for the SNES 2. It's the ugly yellow. Like I really like. I don't care about aesthetic, but that ugly yellowing of that console was awful. So there's no yellowing on the SNES 2. With the NES 2, or the NES Top Loader as it's most commonly referred to as, it's great for those reasons. It's very similar to the SNES 2 in that, but I think the reason why I decided to rank it higher was because even though it had everything going for it, including the low price and all that, I mean it was $50 back then, which was still pretty cheap. Very cheap compared to the Super Nintendo and Genesis at that point. It still it deserves an A because of the controller. Honestly, the NES controller could have used a lot of improvements, to say the least. And the curve shape is a lot better with your hands, less cramps than the rectangle. Although the rectangle is nice for its time, this is a definitive way to play 8-bit games with the curved NES controller. So we're also going the extra mile and redesigning the controller and making it better, much better than the original. Gives it an A. Then we have the PS1. Now the PS1 is, I just love it. The PS1 came out in 2000, around the same year as the PS2. And when it came out, it was really cheap. It was less than half the price of the PS2. It was like close to the price of a game. Because by like 2001, 2002, the PS1 cost about $50, and that was about the price of a new game. So this is the reason why the PS1 was not discontinued until 2006, because this thing kept the thing going for another half decade, and it was awesome. Because the PS2 backwards compatibility also kept the PS1 relevant. So if you bought a PS1, it wasn't like support of the console would end anytime soon. You still had really strong support for the platform, because that's how backwards compatibility works, man. That's the great thing about it. Is that if the new generation is backwards compatible, it'll be much less likely for if you bought the redesign for it just to only be irrelevant and discontinued shortly thereafter. Like with the SNES 2, it was manufactured in 97, was discontinued in 99, because although the redesign is good for introducing new people, it wasn't enough to continue to sustain the platform. So it was discontinued 2 years later. But this PS1, this slim PS1, was discontinued 6 years after the redesign, which is very rare. So this deserves to be in the A rank, in my opinion, because of that. And also to add the icing on the cake, the new feature it had was an optional add-on. Some of them are actually bundled with it, the LCD screen that made it portable. So you could play it in the car, you could play it like on the go. You needed to have it plugged into some type of adapter for it to actually work. But you could plug it into a car, no problem. But, yeah, it's still not as practical as a handheld, but that's still an added bonus to it, that it has that. And it makes no compromises like the other redesigns that you see here in the A rank, and actually makes quite a bit improvements. So, while the Xbox One S is great, it did not need a redesign quite as much as the 360. So let's get into the 360S or 360 Slim, which is what the S stands for. The 360 Slim deserves an A because it made so many improvements from the original 360, which was awfully designed, poorly made, Red Ring of Death all the time. I went through 3 original 360s. I mean, that's how unreliable and awful it was. This finally killed the Red Ring of Death. Finally. This thing might have gotten an S if they did it sooner. And if the Xbox 360 wasn't still very successful without this thing being released, because although the thing had a lot of Red Ring of Death for something that was so damn defective, it sold a lot of units. But the 360S still deserves some distinguishment because it was great. It was it fixed the significant problem that the 360 had, and because the 360 had that huge problem with the red ring, it deserves an A because that problem being fixed is pretty significant. So if you're looking for a 360, don't get anything unless you're getting a 360S, or even a 360E is okay, but at the time it's just I don't know. There's really no difference. That's the reason why the 360E got a low ranking. It's not that the E is bad. It's just not as good. And also, if you were into the Kinect, it had direct port where you could plug the Kinect, so you didn't need like a special adapter or whatever. It worked straight with the Kinect. And you know, that's a good redesign in my opinion. Not only one that adds features that adds to an already amazing platform, but maybe fixes one that wasn't so good to start off with. And that's obviously another situation where a redesign is needed and is really good. But you know, they really could have done it a little bit sooner. This thing came out in 2010 to kind of go along with the launch of the Kinect, but it's still really good and deserves to be deserves to be in the A rank, definitely. So we have the Xbox One X. Now, I originally thought this thing is pointless. Like, why are they releasing these mid-gen, more powerful versions of the same console? Why are they trying to make console gaming into PC gaming? And I was a hugely against the idea of these mid-gen upgrade consoles, because I was afraid what would happen would that there would be games that would be exclusive to the upgraded model and therefore not compatible with the original one, making it borderline a new generation. Because when you buy a console, you expect it to be reliable, you expect it to be supported for at least 6 years, right? So when they go along and say, well, let's release a new console that's the same model, the same console, different model, but we're gonna make certain games exclusive to it, that's kind of like the antithesis of a console. And that's why this thing is ranked so low. The Turbo CD. Or not Turbo CD, Neo Geo CD. This thing, though, the Xbox One X did not do that. Any game that is enhanced with the Xbox One X still works on the original one. So although PUBG does not run that great compared to the Xbox One X version, it still runs. And I think PUBG is actually the best-selling game on the Xbox One platform, like, of all time, which is like, wow. Anyway, it enhances games, even games from the 360 era. So 360 backwards compatible games are actually enhanced and look the best that they've ever looked. And overall, it's a good value, I would say. And the reason why I think it's a good value, especially, I have a feeling. Okay, you heard it here first, and I'm going to make a separate video about it because it deserves distinct attention. I think the Xbox One X will be forwards compatible with the new Xbox. Meaning that certain games that are released on the Xbox One X, because the Xbox One, I think, is getting a little bit too underpowered, will be compatible with the new Xbox games. I think we're going to see that. So even though you're going to buy a console in 2017, like right towards the middle of the generation, that's an upgrade, but in 3 years you'll get another upgrade and it'll cost you $500 also. I think they're going to accommodate people who bought this. Mark my words, you heard it here first. I think that's what's going to happen. So, the Xbox One X is a great redesign, and it didn't hurt people, it didn't punish people who were early adopters, but it also rewarded people who decided to go with the redesign. And I think that's a good middle ground. I think that's the best way you can do it. Because when we talk about redesigned handhelds, we're going to talk about the new 3DS, which did not do that, to say the least. So that's the Xbox One X. Great redesign, the enhancement, and it's also true 4K. So I think we should talk about the distinction between these two before we move on to the S category. The PS4 Pro is fake 4K checkerboard. Xbox One X is true 4K. And because the Xbox One platform has backwards compatibility, it can actually enhance older games, while through the PlayStation 4, the only way to play older games is through PlayStation Now. So if you care about older games looking really good, and if you like graphics, and if you're mainly a console gamer and you don't really want to make that jump to PC, I think the Xbox One X is worth it. Maybe a little bit less like right now. I think if you bought it when it came out, you might have gotten a little bit more longevity out of it. But I think I don't think you can go wrong with it. I think if they're charging $500 for a console, there's no way they're going to say that new games on the new Xbox are not going to work with it, at least at first. Maybe like when we get towards the middle of the generation, it's going to stop working, but I think that won't be for a while. But I think it's more it's more powerful. First of all, it's really more cost. It's more efficient too. Like in terms of cost, like the PS4 Pro will cost you $400 for a console in 2016, but it didn't really offer that much to justify it. It wasn't bad. It did offer something, but it wasn't like really didn't feel like it was worth that money. At least compared to the Xbox One X, which some people would argue, not worth $500 because it's still not as good as a PC, and some games still only run at like 30 frames per second. Yeah, I think that will be completely remedied though when we come to the new generation. So that's what I think is going to happen with the future, and comparing the PS4 Pro with the Xbox One X. It's just almost everything the PS4 Pro did wrong, the Xbox One X did right. So it's got to be ranked significantly higher, and also higher than the S, because it actually offered some more stuff. I mean, the Xbox One S had the HDR and everything, but it was good, but it wasn't really like exceptional. You know what I mean? So there's only one console left that I did not talk about, and it's one console on this list. And it's one that I've talked about extensively on this channel. And I consider it to be the most significant redesign to have ever existed. It is the most effective redesign, even a little controversial, so there may be a little bit of controversy surrounding this entry as the greatest redesign of all time. But I think I have a good case for why the PlayStation 3 Slim is the greatest console redesign of all time, out of all these. Everything on the A was good, but it didn't deserve to be alongside the PlayStation 3 Slim. Now, some can view this as a compliment to Sony and the PlayStation 3, but conversely, you can also view it as a true testament to how awful the PS3 was for the first few years of its life cycle. Because the greatest redesign is the one that improved the most and fixed all of the fuck-ups from the original model. Because it had a lot of fuck-ups and it improved almost everything about it. So that could be viewed as a compliment to how well Sony was able to flip it around as much as they, because for a while it seemed like the PlayStation 3 was going to be a commercial failure. People were even talking about this being Sony's last console because of how much of a failure it was. And now look at Sony with the PlayStation 4, and it looks like they're going to keep up that momentum with the PS5. But the PlayStation 4 the PlayStation 3 is probably the greatest comeback story in video game history ever. I mean, it was looking pretty bad. It had very little third-party support for a while. Most of the games were coming to 360, and the games that even were multi-platform kind of ran like shit on the PS3, the original one. And I know what some people are going to say, right? How can you put these in the A category, like especially the Intellivision 2 and the Xbox One X, for adding features, while you endorse a redesign on the S rank that took away a feature? And that feature, of course, is the PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility. And I am a huge fan of backwards compatibility, but I feel like in this case, the ends justified the means. The PlayStation 3 was struggling mostly because of the enormous asking price of the console. I mean, $600 was just astronomical. But they were able to 250 gigabytes, $299. In 2009 was when this thing came out, so halfway through the life cycle, a little bit less. And this is the PS3 that I've used. And I'll tell you guys a little bit of a story. My first PS3, it was given to me, I actually remember this very well, on May 1st, 2009. It was going to be given to me on my birthday as a surprise, but because my grandma was really sick and I was really upset, or it just my mom decided to give birthday to me early because she knew my birthday was going to be really shitty. And sure enough, my grandmother dies on May 2nd, the day before my birthday. My birthday party was canceled. It was the shittiest birthday of my life. But I remember that one day, that day of enjoyment and just overall excitement over that PlayStation 3. Just the improved graphics. And at that point, the only thing I had was a PS2. Actually, my first console was a 360. I had a 360 arcade back in 2008. My mom won it in a raffle, but it had no memory, and I refused to buy. I didn't want to buy a hard drive, and it also didn't have online because you had to pay for that. So I ended up not using it. I just had Lego Indiana Jones on the 360 arcade, and I wanted a PS3. I was a PlayStation guy. I didn't really like the Xbox arcade. I eventually grew to like it until it broke because the 360 arcade was even cheaper than the other, even more defective than the other ones. I'm surprised I even got a few years out of that one. But the PS3, I was just amazed by it, and it felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Like the PlayStation Home, the overall experience of it, and the graphics were just a huge step up from the PS2. So I was amazed, and I had the fat PS3 because that was the only one that was out. So my PS3 was working for a few months. It had a little bit of problems. There were certain games that would not run properly. Like I tried to play Ratchet and Clank. What was it? Tools of Destruction. And it just wouldn't work. I had an 80 gigabyte fat PS3. So actually, before this Slim was out, they took away PS2 backwards compatibility for a while. So if you're gonna go after the Wii Mini for having no GameCube support, well, you also have the Wii Family, right? So with the PS3 Slim, so this is what happened. My fat PS3 broke on Christmas Day. And I didn't know what else to do besides cry. Because all of my new games for Christmas were on the PlayStation 3. I think one or two of them were on the Wii because I still kind of a little bit cared about the Wii, but mostly I was on the PlayStation 3 because the Wii was kind of becoming a kid's toy, and I was kind of like growing up. You know, it's kind of like entering those preteen years. I was 11 years old. And I kind of wanted an experience that was a little bit more mature. And I was entering middle school, and all my friends were on PlayStation or Xbox, and they were not on the Wii. No one cared about the Wii at that point. But I remember that, and my parents, you know, they took me to GameStop, and they got me a new a PlayStation 3 Slim, and yeah, that was great for them to do that because I guess they felt like they kind of had to because all the games they got from me are that not Santa, because at that point I didn't believe in Santa anymore, but you know, I was 11 years old. If I still believe in Santa at 11 years old, we got a problem. But I remember just being so grateful that they would do that. Like I appreciated it, and you know, that's my experience with the PlayStation 3 is mostly with the Slim, and remembering how disappointed I was with the fat version and just how defective it was to break down after 6 months. I didn't even have that problem with my 360, with my old 360. It eventually got the red ring, but only after like a year, or not. It was a little bit longer than that, like 2 or 3 years. This thing broke down after not even 6 months, and I was so sad. So the reliability similar to the Xbox 360S, but also if this thing was not redesigned and was more reliable, And also it was just it revitalized the PlayStation platform. It fills in my opinion, all the check boxes that you need for a redesign. It cuts costs and it reinvigorated interest in the PlayStation platform. Without the PlayStation 3 Slim, I think, and this is a bold statement to make, I don't think there would have been a PlayStation 4. Or I think if at the very least, Sony would have been very close to bankruptcy. It would have been very dire for Sony leading into this generation, and it was dire because although the PlayStation 3 eventually turned around, it took a long time and it took significant resources to fix it and to bring that consumer interest back. And that was mostly for the PlayStation 4 and also to cut the losses for the PS3. But if they expected to stay in the console race, they had to fix the PlayStation 3 and not do what Sega did when their platform didn't work out, instead of just giving up on it and abandoning it like they did with the Saturn with Sega. Sony learned from that and said, no, we gotta fix the PS3, and they did. And notice as soon as this model came out around 2009, and all these exclusives that came out along with it to revitalize the PlayStation brand, you notice that's when the PlayStation 3 started becoming truly competitive with the Xbox 360. For the first 3 years, the console race was not even close. It was not even close. Xbox had it in the bag. At the end of the day, it was a tie. Literal tie. Maybe the Xbox 360 sold a little bit more, maybe the PS3 sold a little bit more, but that's a virtual tie. And unless you want to count the Wii, but I don't think we'll count the Wii, because the true console battle in the 7th generation was the PlayStation 3 versus Xbox 360. The Wii was kind of just in its own realm, in its own realm of existence. But the PlayStation 3 Slim is the greatest console redesign to ever exist. I mean, it's still 10 years later, it's sitting right there and it still works just fine. No problems at all. Even after I cracked it by accident, it still works fine, no problem. So this thing is damn durable, I'd say. No yellow light of death. Similar to the Xbox One S having no red ring of death, because the yellow light of death was a big problem. I didn't even have the yellow light, it just crapped out on me, my fat PS3. So while I'd recommend the fat PS2 almost every time over the slim PS2, the slim PS3 was so much better than the original PS3, but that's really because the original PS3 was terrible. I'm not trying to be a Sony fanboy here by ranking this so high. It really just attests to just how awful the PlayStation 3 was for half through the generation. So, wow, that was long. Can you imagine if I also included handheld redesigns? How long would be? This is over 2 hours. Wow. My mind is blown that it got that long. But I had a lot to say. This is actually longer than my actual console ranking video. The video where I actually rank consoles is about half the length of the one where I rank console redesigns, and not even talking about handhelds, just console redesigns. But I guess the number is not too far off, because there are plenty of consoles that have like 2 or 3 revisions to them, so I guess it about evens out to the number of actual consoles. Not quite. It's still a good amount less. So I don't know why I said so much, but I guess there was a lot to cover, a lot more to cover than in previous podcasts. Now you know why I do this once a month, because if I do this frequently, like 1 to 2 hour podcasts, people are going to get tired of it. So it gives you enough time to digest it, to maybe watch it in multiple watching intervals. Just click on the VGR playlist and you got it. But Wow, my voice is shot. I've been recording for a long time. I expected this to just like be like a short little thing that I would do. It ended up being a lot longer, and longer than I would have wanted. But I think it was fun. I hope you got some enjoyment out of it. So leave in the comments down below what you want to see for next month, which topic you want me to cover. I was thinking about a few things. I was thinking about handheld redesigns, but I think we'll leave that for the future, because I think in the near future we're gonna get a Switch Mini, and also I think we're sick of talking about redesigns. So we're talking about something else, maybe like PlayStation IPs, Sony IPs, like ranking all the IPs, the exclusives, like Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter and Uncharted, like ranking them all, which was the best, which was the worst. Well, that could be an interesting topic. I'm also thinking about doing add-ons. So the Kinect, the Sega CD, Atari Jaguar CD, TurboGrafx CD. There's going to be a lot of CDs. So those types of expansions, add-ons that add on to the console. There's certain games that are exclusive to that specific peripheral. So if you don't have it, there are certain games and experiences you're missing out on. So I think that's probably what I'm thinking about doing next month. But let me know in the comments what you guys want to see. Or yeah, so that's about it. Sorry for taking a lot of your time, but I hope you. I think this is around the time of the year where everyone's getting off of school. So I've been off of school for like well over a month at this point, like month and a half almost, because I got out really early, like May 8th in my college. But this is around the time where like younger people get out of school, around June. So hope you guys enjoy your summer. And yeah, there are more good things coming for this channel and throughout the summer, not just this podcast, but other things. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, not going to take more of your time. I appreciate those of you who stuck around this long. If you stuck around this long, type 7 in the comments. I don't know, just to let me know you actually watched for that long, because I really appreciate that. Whether it's in one sitting, which I don't do myself, or if you watched it throughout multiple interviews, I still appreciate you taking the time and supporting my channel and watching what I have to say, listening to what I have to say. Because believe it or not, a lot of effort is put into these. It seems like some simple ranking thing, but it's so much more. So anyway, thank you guys. I'll see you guys later.